From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
Thank you for joining us this morning on Sunday Edition, back at my home in Holiday, Utah, and we've got a lot to talk about today. At the very end of the program, we'll be talking with Utah's First Lady about her Show Up Utah initiative. She is claiming we have an empathy gap, and hopefully how this initiative can solve that. We also, of course, are going to have a change in the voting in Salt Lake City. The city council voted 6-1 to change the way we vote. We'll talk about that change, what it exactly is, what effect it might have. But we also got the first look at the census numbers in the United States of America, but particularly here in the state of Utah. And I really appreciate Mallory Bateman joining us from the Gardner Institute at the University of Utah. And Mallory, let's talk about these numbers. If I am reading everything correctly, we're the fastest growing state in the entire country when you look at it as a percentage.
Yeah, so we grew by 18.4% in the decade, which was the fastest growing in the nation. And if you look back our past decades, that's actually a little lower than we had been, but we were still faster than everyone else this decade.
What is it about the Intermountain West, particularly when you look at Idaho and you look at Nevada and you look at, I think it's one of the Dakotas and then also Texas, but right here in the heart of the Intermountain West, there are three of the fastest growing states in the union.
Yeah, and throughout the decade, we've noticed the Intermountain West really popping as a growth region. And, you know, at least in Utah, we've got our strong economy. All the Mountain West states have a great quality of life, depending where you're coming from, potentially a lower cost of living. And so I think there's a lot of things that make the Intermountain West really attractive to move to and stay and make your home.
As the census was being taken, we on this program and of course elsewhere really tried to underscore how important it was to be counted and what's at stake. Many people think only of congressional districts, but boy, there's funding that comes into the state, all kinds of allocations of resources and money. But let's get right to that top thing that pops to most people's minds immediately, and that is the congressional districts. Does anything change here in the state of Utah?
No, our congressional delegation is going to remain at 4 people, and that's what people expected when they looked at the growth and comparing to other states. So we're staying the same. I know Montana gained a seat. They were pretty excited about that. But we're going to stick with 4 congressional representatives for now.
Many times because of Utah's rather unique role in the country when it comes to military service. I know in the War on Terror, there were many times we reported that, again, percentage-wise, more Utahns were participating in that than anywhere else in the country. We also have Mormon missionaries that are out serving in the field. A lot of people because of business. How is that accounted for, especially when it comes to the federal level? How is that counted? And then when it comes to something like going on a mission?
So the federal employees, if they're federal civilian employees or if they're part of the military, they are counted thanks to record keeping from the federal government. Any missionaries who were living abroad, if in a normal year, if they would have been abroad, they wouldn't be counted here. But because of COVID and because of missionaries getting sent home at the beginning and the reference date being April 1st, there is a chance that some of those young people that were abroad, they wouldn't have been counted here. They might be counted here because they had to restart their home here, not knowing what COVID would put forward.
I think of the many conversations about immigration, migration from state to state that we have had as a country and also as the state of Utah. I remember Governor Lovett years ago in a conversation we were having stated just very, very plainly, for those that were concerned about the people that were migrating in across borders into the state of Utah, paled in comparison to what he called the homegrown increases we have in the state. How does that compare? Those that are choosing to come to Utah versus those who are just being born here?
So this decade, we measured it to be around 35% of our growth was due to migration. So people moving in, more people moving in than moving out. And then about 65% was due to natural increase, which is births minus deaths. So we were around, I think 380,000 or something for natural increase, and around 180,000 for net migration, excuse me. So those babies are still playing a significant role in our population growth.
Just a very quick final thought on this. First of all, how many more numbers are we going to get? Have we had the full download yet? And then also, how do we put the information into play? What can we do in the state of Utah to now benefit from knowing exactly what these numbers are?
So all we got so far is a total number for the state, and then a little bit of insight into those who are living abroad and the resident population. There will be a release in August, September with the redistricting data that'll give some insights into race and total population at our community levels. And then there's a full download. We're not quite sure of the timing of that one yet. You know, COVID changed the timing of a lot of things, so we're still waiting on the timeline for that, but getting those community insights in the fall.
Mallory, thank you so much. Joining us, Mallory Bateman from the Gardner Institute at the University of Utah. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, changes are coming to the way Salt Lakers will be voting, and we do have an election coming up this November 2nd. So what are the changes? What might it affect in the capital city? That's coming up next on Sunday Edition. Well, it is official. The way Salt Lakers vote, the system of voting in our capital city is changing. And for the November 2nd election, it will be in effect. So we thought it would be wise to talk about what this new system of voting will look like for those who are casting their ballots in Salt Lake City. Now, this isn't a first. It's been done in Vineyard, Utah. It's been done in Payson, Utah, and some other communities and even states like Vermont have implemented something, if not exact, similar to this. So we're very pleased to have the chair of the Salt Lake City Council, Amy Fowler, joining us right now. And Chairwoman, thank you for spending time with us on this Sunday morning. And tell us what has changed in Salt Lake City and how the voting system will affect Salt Lakers.
Well, thank you, Doug, so much for having me today. As everyone may know, the City Council adopted or will be adopting, we adopted the ordinance on the 20th that would allow for ranked choice voting at our next election. Now, ranked choice voting is exactly sort of what it sounds like. You have candidates that you rank in the order that you would want to see them, 1, 2, 3. And then if no person wins the 50% threshold, then the bottom people are eliminated, bottom person is eliminated. And if the eliminated person was your number 1 vote, then we recalculate and your number 2 vote then kind of jumps up the line, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I've heard, especially in old-time politics, going back, for example, the election of 1860 for the president, not so much the election, but the nominating process in Chicago for Abraham Lincoln. Everybody thought it was going to be William Seward, but it ended up being Abraham Lincoln because he was everybody's favorite second or third choice. And just as you described, as people would drop off, votes would be taken again at that Chicago convention. All of a sudden, Abraham Lincoln started to go up. The gap started to close. He ended up being the nominee. The enthusiasm level for this type of change within Salt Lake, if I remember correctly, on the city council, the vote was 6-1. What are the council members hearing from their constituency? Are they excited about this change?
You know, I have been hearing from my constituents since I was elected almost 4 years ago about ranked choice voting. My constituents and what we've been hearing from constituents throughout the city is that they do want this new form of voting. And we were unable to do it in the past simply because we do our voting. We contract with Salt Lake County to handle our elections, and they just didn't have the equipment at the time. They do now, and since we've been hearing about it, we decided that we would do as we are elected to do, and represent the people and what they want. And this is what they wanted. So I think there is a lot of excitement among the majority of council members.
Amid the discussions that I have at least been privy to on this, it comes up over and over that hopefully this will help campaigns from being quite as nasty and maybe take some of the ugliness out of running for whatever office it might be. Now, the mayoral race allegedly is nonpartisan, but I'm curious about that. Is that one of the goals, to get rid of some of the nastiness in the political race itself? And will this work outside of a nonpartisan election?
I think it is one of the goals. I think the other goal is to make elections seem more attainable, or campaigns to seem more attainable. I haven't done the numbers on what it will cost or not cost doing it in this way to run a campaign, but what we've heard from people in the communities that are doing this is that it opens up the field for more people to jump in. And that's really what we want to see. We want to see that people have access to becoming an elected official and representing their communities.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Mendenhall, from what I understand, has a little heartburn over this because it eliminates a primary. Maybe you could walk us through that, and perhaps in your discussions with the mayor, what are her concerns?
Doug, I think that you'd have to ask Mayor Mendenhall exactly. I do know that she was concerned about the primary and about us not having a primary race. It was a discussion amongst many of us council members on whether or not we wanted the primary option. So the way that the pilot program is working is that communities, cities, municipalities can elect to do this ranked choice voting with or without a primary. Our council opted to do without a primary. And there was some disagreement, I'll be honest, amongst the council members and some discussion, but ultimately the goal of the ranked choice voting is to be that single elimination type of thing, so that you don't have a primary. It's kind of the whole goal of it. And that's sort of where we decided we were going to go. If we're going to try it, let's try it.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Amy Fowler, who is the chair of the Salt Lake City Council, about the change in voting that will occur in the next election. And am I correct? This will be in effect on November 2nd, right?
That is correct.
When you were talking about, and perhaps even debating this within the City Council chamber, were the experiences of Vineyard and Payson taken into consideration at all on this?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question. Can you repeat that, Mike? The sound was a little off.
Certainly, glad to repeat it. This has been done in Vineyard and Payson, and in the discussion in Utah's capital city, were their experiences taken into account? Were there lessons to be learned?
They were taken into account. In fact, we had a representative from Vineyard come and give a briefing, excuse me, about ranked choice voting and what their experience was when they were going through the process of switching over. We also had Sherry Swenson, our county recorder, come and do a briefing about it and what it would look like and sort of the logistics of it. So we did take into account a lot of the experiences that other people and other municipalities are having, and we'll continue to do that as we start to implement this. It's really important that we get public education out there so people understand how this voting works. The last thing I would want is for anyone to feel disenfranchised with their vote. And so we really want to make sure that people understand how this voting is going to work and have all of their questions answered before November, or as much as we can answer.
I can't help but look at it from a media point of view, because we always sit around. I know the candidates and the various camps are all wringing their hands wondering who's going to win. We are too, and we're always wondering how soon we will actually get the numbers. Do you anticipate this hurrying the process, or will we be waiting even longer as we go through the process of drop off and then retabulate and drop off and retabulate? What do you think on that?
That is a very good question. I think we're also used to the traditional form of voting and how things go. that is one of the sort of nerve-wracking things as an elected official myself. And when I was running my campaign, you kind of calculate in your head the number of yeses you think you have, and then maybe you think you don't have. And then when you have a primary, you get to kind of switch up your campaign strategy. And this is a whole new ballgame for a lot of us.
Right.
And so I think it'll be interesting. I can't say whether it's going to prolong the election night call or make it quicker. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I certainly appreciate you joining us today. And maybe I could throw out just another thought. My friend Jay Evenson in the Deseret News wrote an article on this when it was still being debated and talked about Vermont's experience. Now, of course, that was a statewide, although Vermont is a very small state, but it was a statewide race. It was partisan. And he talked about how some folks were really upset because people that only had a 29% were actually winning offices. And as I understand it from Jay's article, that Vermonters actually repealed it. Do you anticipate any kind of brouhaha like that?
I certainly hope not. Again, we are entering new territory, and we're really the intent from the council's perspective is to make sure that we are widening the field for people to become elected officials and not disenfranchise, but empower voters to really have the candidate that they want to win. I understand there's some statistical issues, and to your point with the article about Vermont, I hope that we don't get there, and I hope that this is as successful as we're all hoping it to be.
Amy, a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be talking with our First Lady coming up next. We are delighted today to welcome the First Lady of the great state of Utah to Sunday Edition, here to talk about her Show Up Utah initiative. And Abby Cox, thank you for joining us this morning.
Be here.
Let's talk for a moment about the initiative itself. What motivated it, and what do you envision it to be, and the difference it will make for the people of Utah, especially our children?
Motivated it definitely is this idea of really trying to combat the empathy crisis that we see playing out in our country and a little bit in our state. I think a lot of times we think that if something didn't happen to us, it didn't happen. And that's a lack of empathy. And I think as we connect with one another, as we serve the most vulnerable, especially our children, and as we learn emotional intelligence, I think we create that empathy, and we make this world a little bit better place for the kids that are coming behind us.
You are quoted as saying that adults nowadays are modeling just about everything but perhaps empathy. What is causing this in your thoughts? What has changed in our society nationally, and certainly maybe here in the state of Utah?
I think we can look at our media, we can look at our social media. I think it's really easy to get swept up in tribalism, where we just aren't talking to one another in meaningful ways. We're talking past one another. We're not trying to get to know someone, to get proximate to someone that may be different from us. We're curating our social media to just be surrounded by people who are thinking just like we are. And I think a lot of times we're losing that sense of community. We just tend to go online and figure out the groups that hate the same people we do, and it's really unhealthy, and it's really unhealthy for our children, but us as adults as well.
I've observed Utah's politics now for almost a half a century, and I've never seen an environment like today. I've seen some high spots and low spots and tides that go in and out. But honestly, it distresses me just how little empathy we seem to have for one another, the reach out ability, and as is described, showing up for other people, regardless of their political views, religious views, whatever it might be. Your program has 4 priorities, or perhaps focuses, might be the better way of putting it. Maybe you could walk us through those 4 areas that you believe we can make some change.
This is really important. Our initiative is called Show Up. And like a friend of mine said, you can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up. So it's really important. The 4 areas are social and emotional learning, especially in our schools with our children as well as our teachers. We're going to create a conference that we can network teaching curricula. And we're going to take those that are doing it really well and really network with those that maybe are just getting into this space. But it's really important that our kids have that emotional intelligence as we go forward when we talk about coming out of this pandemic and the mental health issues that we face all around us. And our kids and our teachers have been through so much this year. We really want to focus to make sure that they have that emotional intelligence, that they can tackle these tough things in the future. The second area is foster care. We have many of our kids at risk of aging out of foster care without having the ability to have a forever family. And so we want to focus on that and then also create caring communities around that family that has adopted that child so that we're really taking care of them and supporting them. And the third pillar is really special to me, to my heart, is Special Olympics Unified Sports. And that's where kids with disabilities as well as kids without disabilities play on sports teams together and have really neat experiences, again, getting close to someone that may have a different experience than you do. And it's just beautiful to see them come together. And so we want to expand those programs in every school that we possibly can. And then last is just a concept that we used on our campaign, and it's just become part of who we are, is service. And so we're going to go throughout the state continuing to do those service projects that we did in the campaign.
Mrs. Cox, where can people get more information? Maybe they want to show up for the Show Up initiative. So how do we do that? Where do we get the info?
You can go to my page at Utah's First Lady, but you can also go to Show Up Utah. We have Show Up Utah Instagram and Twitter, and so we would love to hear from you. And if whoever wants to get involved, we'd love to have you.
It's a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us, Abby Cox, the First Lady of the state of Utah. That does it for our program this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Music and the spoken word is coming.